St. John Fisher once said, "A good man is not a perfect man. A good man is an honest man, faithful and unhesitatingly responsive to the voice of God in his life." These words describe what all of you can be. They are what all of you must be.
Bishop Paprocki is a Chicago native, one of 9 children, ordained to the priesthood for the Archdiocese of Chicago in 1978. He served there as auxiliary bishop of the Chicago Archdiocese from 2003 to 2010 and was named Bishop of Springfield, Illinois in 2010 by His Holiness Pope Benedict XVI. After ordination, he studied civil law at DePaul University, received a JD, and was admitted to the Illinois Bar in 1981. He also holds a licentiate and doctorate in canon law from the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome, as well as an MBA from Notre Dame. So as a member of the clergy, member of the bar, both a civil and canon lawyer, Notre Dame connection, and a member of Napa Legal's board of directors, as well as a longtime defender of religious freedom in America, I think Bishop Paprocki is really uniquely equipped to talk about this topic today, to describe the legal landscape, and also the moral and legal challenges that lawyers may face in serving both church and state. So with that, I will stop talking. And Bishop Paprocki, thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome, Frank. I appreciate the introduction. I might just add that, like our new Holy Father, Pope Leo, I am also a Chicago White Sox fan. So hello to any other White Sox fans out there, too. Well, it is still morning here in the land of Lincoln, and those west of here, good morning. For those of you on the East Coast and east of that, good afternoon. And it's good to be with you for this webinar conversation with the fellows of the Good Counselor Project of the Napa Institute Legal Foundation. So the topic of my presentation is challenges of Catholic lawyers in serving two sovereigns, the church and the state. I speak to you not only as a successor of the apostles, but as a member of the Illinois Bar, where I keep my license to practice law current. And so I am sworn by oath to serve these two masters, church and state. I will begin with reference to a new challenge that just took effect this year here in my home state, the land of Lincoln in Illinois. The new amendments to the Illinois Human Rights Act amended the act effective January 1st, 2025 to add reproductive health decisions as a protected characteristic. The bill defines reproductive health decisions to include employees' decisions regarding abortion, contraception, and fertility treatments like in vitro fertilization, IVF. Under the amended act, it is unlawful for an employer to, one, take adverse action against an employee based on their reproductive health decisions, such as fail to hire, discipline, termination, or unequal benefits. Two, engage in harassment by making unwelcome or offensive comments based on an employee's reproductive health decisions. Three, refuse reasonable accommodations related to abortion or other reproductive decisions. Four, retaliate against an employee for opposing such discrimination. And or five, fail to communicate the act's obligations to employees by including the information in employee handbooks and posting the information in the workplace. I'm confident that you can understand and appreciate how offensive and antithetical these provisions are to the teachings of the Church and the faith of Catholics. Obviously, these amendments to the Illinois Human Rights Act pose serious challenges, not only to Catholic lawyers, but to all who believe in the sanctity of human life from conception to natural death. So, what are we to do? How are we going to respond to this challenge? Well, good lawyers do not just wring their hands and moan, "Woe is me, what am I going to do?" No, we take action. We do what we were trained to do. We file a lawsuit. Thanks to the generous offer of pro bono representation by the Alliance for Defending Freedom, the Diocese of Springfield in Illinois joined the Pregnancy Resource Center of Rockford, Illinois, in filing a pre-enforcement challenge to the amendments of the Illinois Human Rights Act. There is no doubt in my mind that this law is wrong and needs to be challenged, and I'm hopeful for a successful outcome given the favorable recent jurisprudence of the courts in matters of religious liberty, especially in the United States Supreme Court. I call your attention to a couple of other pending cases that merit our consideration. This past March 24th, the Archdiocese of Chicago filed a lawsuit seeking injunctive relief and damages from participants of a wide-ranging racketeering scheme designed to profit from more than a dozen fraudulent claims of priest sexual abuse. The civil filing in the Circuit Court of Cook County exposes a racketeering enterprise among a web of connected individuals, some of whom are convicted felons and known gang members, who took advantage of the Archdiocese's pastoral response to compensate real victims of priest sexual abuse. The materials include more than 24 individuals who filed claims, recruited false claimants, and coached them on how to describe fake allegations of abuse involving former priest Daniel McCormick. One of the individuals is a convicted murderer currently serving time in prison. The defendant conspirators are associated by gang affiliation, friendship, or family. They counseled one another on what to say, how to pursue a false claim, how to establish purported injuries, and how to reach attorneys. In some cases, the co-conspirators exchanged money before achieving a settlement, enabled by litigation funding loans. So how did we find this out? Although participants on Illinois prison calls are warned that they are being recorded, co-conspirators in recorded calls from prison discuss free money and how easy it is to bring a claim. One past claimant admits he was not involved with McCormick's church or programs. The Circuit Court of Cook County has already ruled that 2 other cases were fraudulent, and several others have been abandoned by the claimants and their lawyers. The filing reflects the breadth of the fraud and seeks to expose the conspiracy that has become a criminal enterprise for those involved. In a statement on behalf of the Archdiocese, General Counsel Jim Gioli said, "We trust and believe people when they come forward with abuse claims. These individuals have violated that trust and have attempted to take advantage of it. We have a duty to oppose claims we know are false, to protect and stand up for real survivors of abuse, who ultimately are the ones harmed by fraud. False claims make it necessary to investigate all claims more aggressively, which places a greater burden on true survivors." End of quote. In a closely watched case decided this past June 5th, the United States Supreme Court decided the case of Catholic Charities Bureau versus Wisconsin Labor Review Commission, in which the court overturned a decision of the Wisconsin Supreme Court denying the Catholic Charities Bureau of the Diocese of Superior an exemption from paying into the state's unemployment insurance fund, despite the fact that the state statute offers an exemption for, quote, an organization operated primarily for religious purposes, end of quote. A state agency had said that Catholic Charities did not qualify, and the Wisconsin Supreme Court agreed, issuing a decision in March of 2024, finding that even though Catholic Charities and related entities act from religious motivations, quote, their activities are secular in nature, end of quote. Writing the opinion for a unanimous Supreme Court of the United States, Justice Sotomayor wrote that the, quote, First Amendment mandates government neutrality between religions and subjects any state-sponsored denominational preference to strict scrutiny. The Wisconsin Supreme Court imposed a denominational preference by differentiating between religions based on theological lines. Because the law's application does not survive strict scrutiny, it cannot stand, end of quote. Well, my objective today is not to review cases and litigation strategies for how to win religious liberty lawsuits. There are others who are experts in such matters, such as the attorneys for the Alliance Defending Freedom, the Becket Fund, and the Thomas More Law Center in Chicago. We are fortunate to be beneficiaries of their expertise, which they provide so generously. You are also very smart and can read cases and analyze the jurisprudence of religious liberty lawsuits. Rather, I wish to offer the example of 2 very influential role models to inspire you to be staunch defenders of our natural law right to the free exercise of religion as protected by the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States of America. These 2 inspirational and influential role models happen to be my personal patron saints, Saints Thomas More and John Fisher. Given my patron saints, you might not be surprised to learn that my favorite movie of all time is the 1966 classic, A Man for All Seasons, which won the Academy Award for Best Picture, about the life of St. Thomas More, played by the British actor Paul Scofield. The screenplay was written by Robert Bolt. In one particularly pertinent scene as it relates to the theme of my topic for this conversation today, Thomas More is having a conversation with his predecessor as Lord High Chancellor, His Eminence Thomas Cardinal Wolsey, the Archbishop of York. Cardinal Wolsey is seeking More's help in drafting a letter to the Holy See regarding the desire of King Henry VIII to divorce the Queen, Catherine of Aragon, so that he could marry Anne Boleyn. Challenging More's reluctance to help, Wolsey says, "You're a constant regret to me, Thomas. If you could just see facts flat on without that horrible moral squint, with just a little common sense, you could have been a statesman. Now, explain how you, as Counselor of England, can obstruct those measures for the sake of your own private conscience." Thomas responds, "Well, I believe when statesmen forsake their own private conscience for the sake of their public duties, they lead their country by a short route to chaos. The implication is that conscience, by contrast, will save the world." In another scene from A Man for All Seasons, the author Robert Bolt has Sir Thomas More describing the inviolability of one's personal conscience by telling the Duke of Norfolk, "What matters is not that it's true, but that I believe it. Or no, not that I believe it, but that I believe it." According to Judge Robert J. Conrad, Jr., in his outstanding book entitled John Fisher and Thomas More, Keeping Their Souls While Losing Their Heads, Bolt is portraying conscience as a possession of self, quoting Bolt as saying that More was a hero of selfhood who had an adamantine sense of his own self. Judge Conrad disagrees. He says, "I see More and Fisher differently. They were not self-confident, but Christ-confident. They were not adamantine followers of self-will, but servants of the one true God, who spoke through his word and his church. Their strength of conviction was rooted in their shared belief that God was true and that his church was a truth-telling institution." Returning to the scene in which the Duke of Norfolk is trying to persuade Sir Thomas More to sign the Succession to the Crown Act of 1534, Norfolk says, "Oh, confound all this. I'm not a scholar, as Master Cromwell never tires of pointing out. And frankly, I don't know whether the king's marriage was lawful or not. But damn it, Thomas, look at those names. You know these men. Can't you do what I did and come with us for fellowship?" More responds pointedly, "And when we stand before God, and you are sent to paradise for doing according to your conscience, and I am damned for not doing according to mine, will you come with me for fellowship?" Conscience is a word that means different things to different people. To some, following one's conscience means to do as one pleases, as one sees fit. To others, following one's conscience is to have the moral and political freedom to please God by what he or she does in life, to oneself and one's neighbors, not simply as one might like or as one would prefer, but as what one ought to do. The word conscience comes from two Latin words, co, the prefix which means together or with, and science, which means to have knowledge about something. Conscience means to share knowledge with someone else about what is right or wrong. Conscience does not act in isolation on some sort of personal or individual intuition disconnected from someone or something else. For a Catholic, a properly formed conscience means to share God's knowledge and the Church's teaching about right or wrong. So those who invoke conscience to justify their rejection of the natural moral law or divine law as taught by the Catholic Church are saying that they have chosen to follow the thinking, knowledge, and values of someone or something other than the Pope or the Catholic Church. Like Thomas More, John Fisher lived and died during England's changeover from Catholicism to Protestantism. He served as the Bishop of Rochester, where I celebrated Mass in the summer of 2019 at his old cathedral during a trip to England for some lectures that I was asked to give at the University of Oxford. Like Thomas More, John Fisher refused to assent to Henry VIII's divorce and declaration of himself as the head of the church. He stayed true to the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. The most striking demonstration of standing up for the truth of one's conscience in the face not only of enormous peer pressure, but also the whole weight of civil authority, is recounted by Judge Conrad in his book, where he describes this scene, which took place in 1529 in the Great Hall of the Blackfriars in London. The occasion was the convening of a papal commission authorized to conduct an inquiry and come to a decision based on the evidence submitted on the question of the king's marriage. The papal legates were Cardinal Lorenzo Campeggio and Cardinal Thomas Wolsey. Seated to the legate's right were King Henry VIII and Queen Catherine. The Queen's counsel, Bishop Fisher, sat nearby. The Archbishop of Canterbury was also present, along with the other bishops of the realm. Conrad's narration of the scene is riveting, and so it is worth quoting at length. King Henry told the legates that he had placed his doubts before all the bishops of the realm, and you know what? Not one of them disagreed. The king says, "And so I did, of all of you, my lords, to the which you have all granted by writing under all your seals, the which I have here to show," holding up the affidavits. The Archbishop of Canterbury then responds, "That is truth, if it pleases your highness. I doubt not but all my brethren here present will affirm the same." There was pause while the king waited for the unspoken assent of the bishops. In the silence, however, one voice rang out clearly from the Queen's bench. "No, sir, not I. You have not my consent thereto." The king turned on Bishop Fisher in anger and showed him an affidavit with seals. "Look here upon this. Is not this your hand and seal?" "No, forsooth, sir, it is not my hand or seal," Fisher answered confidently. By the way, I love his use of the word forsooth, so we should use forsooth more often, I think, in our conversation. So then the king wheels around on the Archbishop of Canterbury. "Sir, how say you? Is this not his hand and seal?" The Archbishop looks down hesitatingly, then confirms the king's speculation, only to be confronted by Bishop Fisher. "That is not so, for indeed you were in hand with me to have both my hand and seal, as other of my lords had already done. But then I said to you that I would never consent to no such act, for it were much against my conscience, nor my hand and seal should never be seen at any such instrument, God willing." The Archbishop, looking for a way out, counters, "You say truth, such words as you had unto me, but at the last you were fully persuaded that I should for you subscribe your name and put to a seal myself, and you would allow the same." But Fisher confronts all the power in the room assembled against him, and without flinching says, "All which words and matter under your correction, my lord, and supportation of this noble audience, there is nothing more untrue." The tension in the hall was palpable. The Archbishop did not attempt to answer, nor did the king attempt to defend him. Instead, he passed the matter over with what amounted to an admission of the truth of what Fisher had said. "It shall make no matter. We will not stand with you in argument herein, for you are but one man." For you are but one man. We can learn much from three key phrases of this narrative. First, when the king asserts that he has the assent of all the bishops, the easy thing to do would have been for Bishop John Fisher to remain silent. Just imagine the courage, fortitude, and strength of conviction for Bishop Fisher to stand up before his king and all his brother bishops, including the Archbishop of Canterbury, and proclaim, "No, sir, not I. You have not my consent thereto." Then Bishop Fisher states clearly and succinctly why he cannot give his consent to the king's demands. "For it was much against my conscience." And then the king's pithy response is also worth noting. "You are but one man." How often do we talk ourselves out of doing the right things by telling ourselves, "I'm just one person. What difference could I make?" Indeed, Bishop Fisher's heroic stance did not prevent the king from doing what he wanted, and the Church of England, with the monarch as its head, persists to this day. But long after the Church of England disappears, what will last is the truth, to which Bishop Fisher gave witness. The power of this witness can be seen in the fact that the name of John Fisher is remembered and venerated today as a saint, while the names of all his fellow bishops who wavered out of fickleness have long been forgotten in ignominy. Both Thomas More and John Fisher lost their lives for holding fast to the truth. They joined the company of saints through the martyr's door because they remained steadfast in the truth that our Lord taught about the indissolubility of marriage. Why does this matter? Why did they not simply vacillate under pressure and disregard this vexing matter of the truth as Pontius Pilate found it so easy to do? St. Thomas More explained why very succinctly when he was summoned to Lambeth Palace to take the oath attendant to the act of succession. Refusing to take the oath, Thomas More said, "My purpose is not to put any fault in the act, or any man that made it, or the oath, or any man that swears it, nor to condemn the conscience of any other man. But as for myself in good faith, my conscience so moves me in the matter, that though I will not deny to swear to the succession, yet unto the oath that is here offered to me, I cannot swear without the jeopardizing of my soul to perpetual damnation." There you have it. The choice in the way we lead our lives is between perpetual damnation and eternal salvation. It was this clarity of vision and confidence of conviction that led John Fisher on the day of his execution to dress up in his finest clothes and tell his servant that this was his marriage day, and it behooves us, therefore, to dress for the solemnity of that marriage. Similarly, to the very end, Thomas More keeps his priorities straight, as attested by his famous last words before his beheading: "I die the King's good servant and God's first." Now, I've spent so much time on Fisher and More because I would argue that we are living through a kind of reformation of society, how we think about politics and law, legitimate authority, and the human person. That is not so remote from what they faced. The historical circumstances are very different, but the social confusion and some of the key issues of belief and conscience might have struck them as very familiar. More refused to sign the oath of supremacy, but all his family and friends did. Today, we are often faced with the temptation to deny the truth in order to avoid confrontations. I think we can imagine what we would like to serve a bishop like John Fisher. But serving a man who accepts death rather than making a small statement against his conscience is hard. But when someone asks for our counsel, we should have the courage to encourage them to speak the truth. But both More and Fisher were serving their two sovereigns faithfully, even as they were executed. It was faithful service to king and country to proclaim the truth. No one should accept the lie that we believe certain things only because we are Catholic or Christian. We believe them because they are true and advocate for those truths in our legal work because they are necessary for human flourishing. An example of the current secular challenges of our time: recently I received a call from a doctoral student at a prestigious university, which I shall not name. Although I had never met him before, I could tell after just a short while on our video call that he was a devout Catholic. He said that he was looking for some academic as well as spiritual advice regarding his dissertation topic. As he explained, he wanted to do his doctoral dissertation on a topic related to the Catholic Church. When he told this to his academic advisor, the professor was appalled and asked, "Why do you want to study the Catholic Church? 30 years from now, there won't be anything left of the Catholic Church." Unfortunately, that attitude is a challenge that many students face in academia, and not just in secular universities. But it is instructive about the difficulties we now face as a religious community in this country. Of course, faithful Christians believe what Jesus said when he told St. Peter, "You are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." And over the last 80 years or so, especially since the Kennedy presidency, we have grown accustomed to a positive Catholic place in our nation's public life. We Catholics have done very well in America, maybe too well for our own good in some ways. The great Jesuit scholar of American life, John Courtney Murray, had exactly that worry. Murray argued that Catholics could make a real home for themselves in this country, despite its Protestant and Enlightenment roots. They could flourish and make a powerful difference by enriching the nation's public life with their faith. But he was very much a realist. In 1940, he gave a series of lectures on the construction of a Christian culture. This is what he said. American culture as it exists is actually the quintessence of all that is decadent in the culture of the Western Christian world. It would seem to be erected on the triple denial that has corrupted Christian culture at its roots: the denial of a metaphysical reality, the denial of the primacy of the spiritual over the material, and the denial of the social over the individual. Its most striking characteristic is its profound materialism. It has given citizens everything to live for and nothing to die for, and its achievement may be summed up thus: it has gained a continent and lost its own soul. He added, in view of the fact that American culture is built on the negation of all that Christianity stands for, it would seem that our first step toward the construction of a Christian culture should be the destruction of the existing one. In the presence of a Frankenstein, one does not reach for baptismal water, but for a bludgeon. End of quote. Those are hard words, but not untrue. Instead of converting American culture, too many Catholics have often been absorbed and digested by it, with their faith bleached into a collection of vanilla pieties. In effect, we are living in the most successful materialist culture in history, shaped by an implicit, very practical atheism, a culture where religion is not so much attacked as buried and rendered irrelevant under an avalanche of distractions and appetites. In the end, what results is a society of more or less permanent unrest, a leadership class of opportunity and power, and a majority underclass who might live in relative comfort but are removed from any real personal agency or sense of higher purpose. Human beings cannot thrive without a belief in some larger meaning to their lives. This accounts for today's epidemic of despair in our country, especially among the less educated, as tracked by Harvard University's Brendan Case and his colleagues in Harvard's Human Flourishing Program. Drug use, anxiety, and alcohol poisoning have all increased over the last 3 decades. Marriage rates have declined, so has religious practice. The nation's manufacturing base that employed so much of the working and middle classes and provided the less educated with dignity has shrunk. And those challenges will continue now with artificial intelligence. The result is fundamentally a spiritual crisis, especially among men, with a sharp spike in what Case describes as death from despair. Fortunately, there is good news as well. Recent data from the Pew Research Center shows that the religious decline of the last few decades seems to be stabilizing. Moreover, hard times produce strong people. In my own ministry, I've been surprised and encouraged by the quality of the young priests and lay apostolates that I routinely encounter. They have energy, they have confidence. They are not afraid of the world they face. We need a lot more of them, but little seeds can produce big results. This is how any renewal starts. My point here is simply this: we cannot hide from public life and its issues. We have the duty of courage to be seeds of holiness in the time and place given to us, the duty to be witnesses of the gospel. In conclusion, I have described some of the legal challenges that Catholic lawyers are facing these days. I have summarized some of the challenges posed by our secular society, and I have offered the example of Saints Thomas More and John Fisher, with the hope that they will inspire and encourage you to be strong in facing the challenges of Catholic lawyers in serving two sovereigns, the Church and the state. John Fisher and Thomas More stood for the truth when it was hardest. They did so when the criticism was greatest. We know, of course, that it cost them their lives, yet they gladly took that path because they knew it was the right one. You are called to follow in their footsteps. No, you will not necessarily have to give up your life, but Christ still demands that you give of your life. To be a Christian is to serve and sacrifice in your daily walk of life. It means standing up to the winds and whims of the present age. It means living intentionally rooted in the faith. This is no easy task. The challenges we face are growing, not shrinking. The culture around us, including presidents, governors, legislatures, judges, to say nothing of opposing counsel, are all urging us to abandon what we believe. Heroic courage is the antidote. It springs from our trust in God, and it is strengthened when we turn to God's grace. I know that I need that courage in my own position, and I have no doubt that you do too. Nearly 400 years after the deaths of Sir Thomas More and Bishop John Fisher, and 5 years before their canonization, G.K. Chesterton remarked prophetically, "Blessed Thomas More is more important at this moment than at any moment since his death, even perhaps the great moment of his dying. Yet he is not quite so important as he will be in 100 years." He said that in 1929. 100 years from then is less than 4 years from now. Yes, we need the example, inspiration, and saintly intercession of St. Thomas More now more than ever. St. John Fisher once said, "A good man is not a perfect man. A good man is an honest man, faithful and unhesitatingly responsive to the voice of God in his life." These words describe what all of you can be. They are what all of you must be. And I trust that they are what all of you will be as Catholic and Christian lawyers, whether in the church or in the world. You carry a burden on your shoulders, but you do not carry it alone. Your burden is the cross, and you share it with the Lord. The triune God, our Blessed Mother, and all the saints are there to guide you and help you serve as the faithful Catholic Christian lawyer that you were born to be. May God give us this grace. Amen. Well, I wanted to allow time for questions here, so fire away. I'm also a goalie, so I'm used to taking shots.
Well, there are a lot of directions we could go with questions. I want to start with one or two here in the realm of vocation and how one's legal work fits into their vocation. So this is a common conversation I find that I have with Good Counselor Project fellows, that they have this sense of calling from God. They know that their legal work and their education and what they have to do in their professional life somehow figures into their vocation. But there's this tension, right? Like, I know, Excellency, when you got your civil law degree, you were already a priest. So where you're going to use that and where you're called is pretty easily discerned by where your superiors tell you to go, what they tell you to do. But for the layperson, right, whose vocation is primarily in marriage and family life for most of us, figuring out, well, should I leave, my big law practice, corporate law, these different areas, and do something that feels or seems more mission driven, right? This is a tension, I think, in the lives of a lot of lay lawyers who take their calling seriously. So do you have any advice, insight into how we go about answering that question?
Yes, I would say that that's a question not only that lawyers ask, but I think many Catholics and committed Christians look at it in terms of how do they put their faith into practice in their work. And for some, there's that tendency to think, well, I have to, if I really want to um, live out the gospel or evangelize or help promote the gospel, I have to get a job working for the church or for some not-for-profit organization or somebody that's going to be doing good things. But I would point out, first of all, a couple of pitfalls with that. One is that the sense of it's, I think Pope John Paul II used the phrase like clericalizing the laity. To think that as a layperson, the only way you can be effective in promoting the gospel is to work for the church. And especially since the Second Vatican Council in the 1960s, the proliferation of various ministries that lay and apostolates that lay people can do. Prior to Second Vatican Council, you either were a priest or religious sister or brother to do that, and so that is a common question. The other thing, the other issue is something raised by Saint Josemaria Escrivá, the founder of Opus Dei, and the very title of that organization is the work of God. And what he promoted was sanctifying your work, whatever it is. You know, if you're a janitor or a pipe fitter or a secretary, you know, it's not that, well, I have somehow, I have my life here. These are the secular things I do, and then, well, not another area of my life, I'm going to do religious things or Christian things. And he talked about sanctifying your work. And so I think that what I would say to a lawyer is that thinking how to do that doesn't necessarily mean you have to leave your law firm or your practice. I think what I'm saying is just how to be a good lawyer, you know, and if you want to work for a not-for-profit or for the church, I mean, there are plenty of jobs out there in that regard. We, you know, general counsel for a hospital system, you know, or for a diocese or some church. Yeah, we need people like this, and there are opportunities out there. But on the other hand, I don't think anyone should feel guilty if you're working for a private law firm. I find it kind of interesting too that, you know, I'm not the only priest or bishop with a law degree. What's kind of unique about what I did was going to law school as a priest, and as I describe it, a tool for ministry to help me in my ministry. But there are others I know that were lawyers before they became priests, and it was almost like, well, I'm leaving the law so that I can go serve the church. And I say to them, well, you got a law degree. Don't just abandon that. You can still use that in very helpful ways. Does that help answer that question?
Yeah, it's funny. I have a friend who is a lawyer and then went into the seminary and he's ordained a deacon, transitional deacon. And he had this idea that he was leaving the law. I said, well, I hope they don't make me study canon law or use my law degree. I just want to be a pastor. So yeah, good luck. I think God will probably put that to use. You know,
Exactly.
speaking of the law degree and its uses in the church, would you talk a little bit more about some of the ways that you've used your civil and your canon law degree in your priestly and episcopal ministry?
Yeah, so explain a little bit more why I went to law school, because a lot of people ask me that. You're a priest, why'd you go to law school? Well, when I was in the seminary, I I was reading and learning more about the church's teachings on social justice. And those really became prominent with the pontificate of Pope Leo XIII. And it's interesting that our new Pope Leo XIV took that name because it goes back to Leo XIII and his classic encyclical Rerum Novarum in the 1890s was sort of like starting Catholic social teaching. And there was a synod of bishops that took place in 1970. So that's when I graduated high school. So, and I was just starting college seminary. But they issued a document after that synod called Justice in the World. And there's one sentence in particular that stood out and it's stuck in my mind. It's action on behalf of justice and participation in the transformation of the world is a constitutive element of preaching the gospel. Mm-hmm. That is very powerful. And the power of words, I would say that sentence changed my life because it's talking about action on behalf of justice, not just talking about it. So that said to me, all right, if I want to help the poor, if I want to promote justice, I can't just be getting up in the pulpit and talking about it. I want to actually do something hands-on. And then the phrase constitutive dimension of preaching the gospel. This is not something like, well, I'll preach the gospel. If I have a little spare time, then I'll help the poor. It's constitutive. I have to do this. And so that's why I went to law school. And then as a lawyer, when I was admitted to the Illinois bar, I and a classmate of mine co-founded the Chicago Legal Clinic to provide legal services for the poor. My best friend in law school was Jewish, and so we had a Jewish lawyer and a Catholic priest started this legal clinic. So it was an interesting partnership. And I focused primarily on immigration law. We had a lot of Hispanic immigrants. And I thought I would do that the rest of my life. I'd be a parish priest and I have this legal clinic. They say if you want to make God laugh, tell him what your plans are. So, I obviously my archbishop had other plans for me. He eventually did ask me to go study canon law, and that turned out fine. But my point there is, that it was very, very much the sense of wanting to put that into practice. Since then, as a priest, as a bishop, even I've continued to be involved. I was involved with the Chicago Legal Clinic for many years. When I was here in Springfield, I founded the Catholic Charities Legal Services. We received a substantial bequest with the condition it had to be used for the poor. And my finance officer said, we have this bequest that has to be used for the poor. How do you want to use it? And I said, I know exactly what I want to do with that. We'll start Catholic Charities Legal Services. So we do that. And then I've been doing a lot of teaching as an adjunct. I've never been a full-time professor, but I taught at Loyola University Law School in Chicago, a course called Canon Law for Civil Lawyers, and then developed a course also on healthcare issues in canon law. And then I taught for 6 years at Notre Dame Law School in South Bend, Indiana. And the last couple of years, I've affiliated with Ave Maria School of Law in Florida. So I'm mostly teaching there online, but maybe when I retire, winters in Florida will be nicer than winters in South Bend.
Before we move on to the next question, one of our attendees asked if you could repeat the sentence that you said about social doctrine and preaching the gospel that changed your life.
Oh, yes. Okay. Action on behalf of justice and participation in the transformation of the world is a constitutive dimension of preaching the gospel. And that's found in a document called Justice in the World, issued by the 1970 Synod of Bishops.
Thank you. All right, then the next question, kind of in this same area, one of the attendees asked, in what areas of law or public society do you see the greatest need for more devout Catholic lawyers?
Well, I'd say a couple of areas. One would be religious liberty law. I think we see constant challenges to religious liberty, like the case I mentioned in Wisconsin, which is just stunning, that you would have people saying, including the Wisconsin Supreme Court, that Catholic Charities is not a religious organization. Why? And what they were saying, because Catholic Charities serve non-Catholics. Yeah. And then they did not overtly proselytize their clients. Well, I mean, that's just from our point of view is it's like, well, the only reason we do Catholic Charities is out of a religious motivation. And it'd be contrary to our religious beliefs, actually, to say, sorry, we only serve Catholics. No, the parable of the Good Samaritan is you don't just take care of your own, you take care of anybody that's in need. And then in terms of proselytizing, there's that saying that's often attributed to St. Francis of Assisi is preach the gospel constantly, if necessary, use words. Well, helping the poor, we don't necessarily have to hand, a food line is here's your plate of food and here's Bible. You just proselytize in different ways. So, and I'm grateful that our Supreme Court has been very good on religious liberty, like this case in Wisconsin, overturning the Wisconsin Supreme Court by unanimous decision, and the opinion being written by Justice Sotomayor. So this is not one of those conservative versus legal versus liberal justices. I think the court as a whole is very strong on this. However, that's the Supreme Court, but there's a lot of lower courts where there's constant challenges on this. So I think for those to go into religious liberty law, I mentioned some of the organizations like the Becket Fund, Alliance for Defending Freedom. Thomas More Society that actually helped with pro bono litigation, and then our own organization, the Napa Institute Legal Foundation. Those are possibilities. Another area that I would say, the one that I worked in quite a bit, was immigration law. Our immigration system it's really complex. Some have said immigration law is more challenging than tax law, if you can imagine that, and it is very challenging. And our immigration laws need to be reformed, but there are a lot of people here who are undocumented that need help and possibly could get help. That's one area. And then any other area of poverty law, and I should mention also that being here in Central Illinois, there have been articles written recently about the lack of lawyers in rural communities. So, if someone is growing up in a rural area and goes to law school, the likelihood is that new lawyer is going to stay in a big city somewhere. And small rural communities are hurting for lawyers to do, simple things like wills and trusts and real estate closings and things like that, and just not having a lawyer for miles around.
I think we have time for one more. So somebody asked, and I know this is a loaded question, but somebody asked if you'd comment on, we have the First Amendment and we have these robust religious liberty protections, but it seems the spiritual beliefs of our country's founding fathers are very different than ours. So no particular question there, but do you have any comment to kind of wrap up on religious liberty in America and whether there's a tension with Catholic belief on this topic?
Well, yes, they were different. So the founders of our country and many of the first settlers here were fleeing religious persecution uh, in England, but they came here precisely for religious freedom. And so when that's written into the First Amendment, which, by the way, there's the Bill of Rights are amendments because there were those who argued that these are rights not given by the state; these are not by natural law. And so even Thomas Jefferson, he talks about inalienable rights. I mean, there was this recognition that there are natural law rights, but when they say, well, okay, but we should put that into writing. So the First Amendment, when it talks about um, no establishment of religion and protecting the free exercise, no establishment of religion was basically to say that there should not be, like the Church of England or the Catholic Church or any other church as the official church of the United States of America. But they were not at all saying what many people take the First Amendment today to mean, that we don't believe in anything. It has to be secular. So the founders, I think, were very religious people, different faith, different from our Catholic faith, but they did believe in religious liberty very strongly.